Hi everyone, welcome to the Research Like a Pro question and answer series. I'm Nicole Dyer, and today for the video we will have a discussion about an orphan book entry in 18th century Virginia. So we'll analyze the contents of this record, discuss the meaning of the record, and hopefully you'll get some ideas for your own research in your family history. This is an excerpt from the recent Research Like a Pro office hours, and if you'd like to join one of our online courses, then you'll have access to these monthly question and answer office hours sessions. And now to the video. This is about an orphan book record, which is kind of a fun record type to think about. So let's dive into this. So first of all, we're going to transcribe this document. So here's the transcription, and it was a little bit pixelated, so I did my best. So if I got it wrong, just let me know in the chat and we'll fix it. So I believe this says Tatum. I just put a squiggle because I couldn't tell if this was a squiggle or a word. Jackson, and I think maybe it says 47586. I think maybe that's a case number. And so then we have Peter Jackson, starting right here. Peter Jackson, orphan of William Jackson, deceased. And then I think maybe this is a DR. Honestly, I was going to look up what this could be, and I don't know. So if anyone knows, put that in the chat. To cash, ... 1.1.3, E accepted of Paul Tatum, returned into Brunswick County Court the 22nd day of August, 1758. Oh, I think this is a 1. This looks the same as that. So that must be, oh, that's the year. Is that the year? That must be the year. Anyway, going back, sworn to by the above named Paul Tatum and approved of by the county and ordered to be recorded. So now we have some questions about this document. Also, let's read the citation below so that we can understand what we're looking at. This is the citation that was provided with this question. Virginia County Court, Brunswick County, General Index to Guardians Accounts 1732 to 1948, Orphan's Book 1740 to 1781. So I think what's going on here is that in the Family Search catalog, it groups two books into one set of images. So you have first the index, and then the first orphan book that starts in 1740 and goes to 1781, and then some of the later collections were the next set of years for the next orphan book. Anyway, so here is the Family History Library call number, and then the DGS number, which is how they've digitized it. Then it's page 88, image 51 of 272, the access date, and then Family History Center in Issaquah, Washington is where this was accessed. So it looks like we're on page 88 of Orphan's Book 1740 to 1781 in Brunswick County. So the question says, I think this means he is receiving 113 or 113 sterling, and he is now of age, which is how I computed his year of birth. I recognize the Tatum name as the in-law of William Jackson, Peter Jackson's father, who dies in 1742. Is this a lot of money back in 1758? Also, Peter Jackson is in the General Index and listed as out in 1758, volume 1, page 88. So like we had thought, this is the first volume of the set of Orphans book for the county, page 88. And so the idea that he's out correlates with this assumption that he is of age, and that's why he's receiving money here. So what do we need to do to answer these questions? This is one of the things that we need to do a lot in our research is do additional historical contextual research to understand the record that we're seeing. And so we have some questions about the money, so we could research the currency. We have questions about legal age and what that means. You know, what age did orphans become adults? Also, what was kind of the meaning of these orphan court proceedings? This is a great connection to make about the relative. And then we had a question about how much money was that? So we can kind of do some historical context research for that. And then even more, we can research what does that mean to be listed as out in an orphan record. So we have a lot of questions to answer, and the way we find these answers is by doing our historical context research. We look at the laws, we look at historical articles, and we do Google searches until we find reputable sources that can help us understand the records. So I did a little of this for an example. So the first one I tackled was the currency, because I actually have had this question a lot too. Understanding colonial currency is always a bit challenging. So I thought I would just do a deep dive and we can all learn from this, right? So the currency of the colonies under British Empire, it was the pound sterling. And so I just did a little research on that. First, I started in Wikipedia, where they had an article about the British pound, it was called the pound sterling. It still is. And they had another article that talked about pounds, shillings, and pence. And then there was just a couple other articles about understanding historical currency. And so these two articles were helpful for that. So as I read all of those, here's what I came up with. So in colonial Virginia and the British Empire, the kind of currency, the pound sterling, had three main types of currency: the pound, so plural, it's pounds, shillings, and pence. And the singular of pence is penny, which is something I learned today. The symbols, of course, we're familiar with the pound symbol for the pound sterling, and it can also be written with a regular uppercase L. And the symbol comes from the Latin currency. And so that was also something I learned today, that these symbols came from Latin currency. And the shilling is represented by the S for the Latin solidi. And I know I'm saying that wrong probably. And then pence, the symbol is the D from the Latin denari. And then we can kind of see how much each one is worth based on their equivalencies. So 20 shillings is 1 pound, which is also 240 pence. And then 12 pence is 1 shilling. And then they even broke down the penny into additional smaller things. So I didn't include farthings and half pennies in this chart, but just so you know, they would divide the penny into 4. That's where you get the for or far, 4 things. And then, of course, a half penny would be dividing it into 2. Now, how do you write this out when you're writing out all the different currency? Well, the way that you would think it would be done is by writing it this way, with the pound and then the number of pounds, and then the number of shillings with the S after that, and then the number of pennies or pence with the symbol. So that was like the way that you would write it if you were really writing it out. But people never wanted to write out this whole thing, so they would take shortcuts. And so the first thing they did was drop the symbol for the pence. And then so it just ended up being like this. And then another thing they did was, instead of writing the S like we write it today, they wrote it with the long S, the stylized S, which then morphed into our slash mark. And so sometimes you'll see it represented like that, and that doesn't mean it's a fraction. So if you've ever seen that, and I've seen this in some plantation records in early Virginia and thought it was a fraction. So now I know it's not a fraction. It's just the shillings and the pence, because they were writing the long S and it kind of morphed into a slash. Another way that they would write this, that you'll see all the time in tax records, is with a dot separating the pounds, the shillings, and the pence. And that's the way we saw it in the Guardian record. So let's go back. You can kind of see the dots in between each. So no, it doesn't mean 113 sterling. It means 1 pound, 1 shilling, and 3 pence. So now that we know what that is, we can determine how much it's worth in today's money. So there's plenty of calculators online that can do this for you. I used this one, measuringworth.com. And so it allows you to put in the starting year and the amount. So 1 pound, 1 shilling, and 3 pence. And I wanted to convert it to 2023. And so I put in calculate, and the answer was 159.70 pounds. And just so you know, in 1971, Great Britain started using the decimal system instead of the pounds, shilling, and pence system that they used before 1971. So that's why you'll see it written like this nowadays. So how much is the Great Britain pound in dollars? I just converted it to dollars so you could see. And so it's about $200 in today's money. What was interesting about this currency calculator, Measuring Worth, is that it gave different amounts based on whether it was purchasing power that you were after, or if you wanted to understand how much it was worth as wealth or in different economic terms. So it might be worth it to go read more about this at the website. But $200 is not quite as much as 113 pounds would have been back then. And so it's good to understand the currency and understand how it was written so that we can get a more accurate idea of how much money he was receiving. Okay, so another question that we had when looking at our guardian and orphan record was about coming of age. And she was absolutely right that you can estimate when a person was born based on when they came of age, when they reached adulthood. So that was a wonderful thing to do. And so some basics about this. Children whose father died and left them an estate were appointed a guardian to manage their financial affairs. So orphan meant fatherless child, not someone with no parents. Usually they still had a mother. Sometimes they may not have had either parent, but it technically meant somebody who had no father. And so when a child died with an estate or an inheritance and they were not 21 years old, they had a guardian appointed, and sometimes it could have been their mother. But if the mother remarried, then to keep the fortune or the inheritance from the mother's new husband, then a guardian was appointed to, and usually it was someone who didn't have like an interest in the inheritance because they weren't going to get it. They were just like an objective helper. And so that guardian was appointed to help that child keep their inheritance until they were old enough to manage it. So legal age in colonial Virginia, and this is from the common law of England that kind of spread to the colonies and throughout the US. So legal age was that once you're 21 years old, then you're an adult and you can receive your inheritance and you can start buying and selling land and your signature is legally binding and that kind of thing. Before that, children were considered infants legally, and so they couldn't do a lot of things. They could do a few things once they were 14. They could choose their guardian. They could apprentice themselves without permission. They could witness deeds. So they could do a few things, but they couldn't do everything until they were 21. So you could absolutely subtract 21 from 1758 to figure out Peter Jackson's estimated birth date. So good job on that. And to read more about legal age, I always go back to this article. It's just a simple explanation with some footnotes to Blackstone and statutes at large from Henning in Virginia that tell us about legal age in colonial Virginia, which can kind of be applied to several other places in the US, especially in the southern states. So this is found at Bob's Genealogy Filing Cabinet.